welcome back to my channel. It's time for my least favorite part of the month, which is wrap-ups, which is why you have not seen a wrap-up in I don't even know how long. I don't even know how many wrap-ups I've filmed.
Oh, hi, thanks for checking in. I'm still a piece of garbage.
But here we are today. We're filming a wrap-up. We're doing our thing. I don't know what I'm doing with my hands. That's the bisexual agenda if I've ever seen one. So in the month of August, I read 16 books, which is great. 0 5 stars though, but 8 4 stars, which means that half the books I read in the month of August were 4 stars, which is great. Then I had 4 3 stars, so still good, 2 2 stars, and then 2 1-star reads. 12 of my books were from female authors, and 4 of my books were from male authors. Obviously, this is just in the gender binary that I can find online. If any of these authors are non-binary, please let me know down below in the comments. I would love to correct that in my spreadsheet. Then 9 of these authors are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and 7 are white authors. So still more than half the books I'm reading are from BIPOC authors, but still almost half of the books I'm reading are from white authors. So I would like to have more of a 75% to 25% ratio, but 11 of the books I read are classified as adult, and 5 of the books I read are classified as young adult. So let's get into the wrap up. So the first book I read in the month of August was The Black Kids by Christina Hammonds Reed. This follows the story of a young girl named Ashley wanting to end her school year on a high note with her friends, but around the time of her prom, the Los Angeles riots that occurred in 1992 start happening. And as the tagline for the book suggests, Ashley is not just one of the girls, she becomes one of the Black kids. So I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5. I feel like this is an extremely important read. It takes place in 1992, but what's really sad is that it could have taken place in 1962, it could have taken place in 2020. The book not only talks about like the trials and tribulations of being a young teenager, wanting to graduate, going to prom, but it also discusses like feminism, race, privilege, and I think Ashley's voice or the narration of the book was really snarky. You could still see that she was also really scared and flawed, which I thought was a really refreshing perspective to take. I think the writing was really simple, but that only further impacted its importance. I was like highlighting notes on every single page. There were parts of the novel that I literally started crying because the lines were so impactful. Ashley's voice was so authentic that I thought she was my friend. The novel had a really hopeful ending, which I actually really enjoyed, even though it wasn't necessarily like the happiest of endings. It came out August 4th, so I highly recommend this one. Now on to a book I really hated and gave 1 star. That is Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. I had this book in my possession and I gave it away right after I read it because I could not be bothered to keep this trashy book. Essentially, this story follows an intersex individual named Cal. It's a generational novel. It follows Cal's grandparents to their parents to themselves. I don't even feel like I can rant as much as I want to in a concise manner about this book and about how much trash this book was. Is Jeffrey Eugenides' prose what the masses who care about the Pulitzer Prize like? Yes, I'm not denying that Jeffrey Eugenides has excellent prose, but he wrote a novel without really consulting any intersex individuals. He used an intersex slur throughout the entire novel. He calls the first woman that the main character falls in love with the object, so she doesn't even have any agency. His characters don't have agency in general, but then the first woman that is a crucial love interest to the main character is just referred to as the object, which, like, I don't even feel like I need to explain why. Then the main character goes on to fetishize Asian women in particular. Like, I don't need to provide more examples of why I think this novel is a piece of garbage. I will leave a link down below to a video from Hans Lindell, which is an Own Voices review, and it pretty much explains everything that my video can't. So sorry to Jeffrey Eugenides and all the people on my Goodreads friends list who rated this 5 stars. You have no taste. Then I read a happy book, thank God. This is The Adventure Zone: Murder at the Rockport Limited by Griffin McElroy, Clint McElroy, Justin McElroy, Travis McElroy, and the art by Harry Pietsch. This is so cute. Basically, this follows exactly what happens in the podcast of The Adventure Zone by the creators of this comic book. So for me, it's technically like a reread because I already know the story. This series continues to surprise me how wonderfully they were able to, first of all, adapt the podcast into a graphic novel. I think this is an attest to the talent of their storytelling skills that they are able to adapt it so flawlessly. Obviously, I'm extremely biased because I already like the podcast, so I already think the story is worth reading. I already think the characters are amazing and funny. The art style already just adds to that charming atmosphere of the book. And I know that I can always count on these graphic novels, the podcast, to put a smile on my face, which is what I needed after I read the last book. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Then the readathon started, hosted by Books and Lala and a bunch of other booktubers. I will leave a link to maybe the announcement video down below, just in case maybe you want to like see what it was. But basically it's a readathon where you read a bunch of books by Canadian authors. So I actually read quite a bit for that readathon. The first book I read was The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King. This depicts the history of the Native peoples in Canada and how they were often depicted as inconvenient to the white people who settled in after. I think this book was extremely educational. I live in Canada. I've studied Canadian history, obviously, and I think there were still a lot of things in this book that I didn't know. The Canadian education system on history is not the best. I think what makes this book so appealing is that King's writing is both educational but really, really, really funny. So I would highly recommend this for those who want to get into Canadian history. So yeah, this was extremely good. It's a nonfiction, so I don't really have much to say. However, I highly recommend it, and I did give this 4 stars as well. Next, I read Split Tooth by Tanya Tagaq. This is a very difficult novel to explain, but the overarching story in the novel is about a young woman who grows up in Nunavut in the 1970s and how she becomes pregnant and needs to navigate the difficult world around her. This book was really interesting because it's part myth but part memoir, so there's a lot of things that happen in the book that you're not really sure if it really happened. Is this part of the myth? Is this part of speculative aspect to the book? But the main takeaway is that it focuses on womanhood and womanhood specifically within Northern Canadian communities. The prose in this was really good, but the novel is also split up into poetry that I thought was really beautiful, and it's also riddled with images that are paired along with the poetry or the prose that I thought were equally as lyrical and equally as powerful as the overall plot of the novel. Everything in this book is an allegory, so it both confused me and amazed me at the same time. I think this will be just as impactful, if not more, upon further reread, so I can't wait to reread this in the future because I really enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Policing Black Lives by Robin Maynard. This is another non-fiction book that discusses Canada's multiculturalism and tolerance and the violent realities of Black people in Canada. So this was incredibly informative, and I cannot recommend this enough to Canadians who think that there is no racism in Canada. I highly, highly recommend this. If you don't read the whole book, read an essay in this because each essay was as equally as informative as the previous one. And I just feel like this is another book that needs to be shoved in the faces of fellow Canadians who really don't know what's going on in their own country. My one kind of complaint about the novel, the writing style is extremely academic, so it could take a little bit to get into. However, I did listen to this on audio and I thought that that was a really, really, really good way to go because the narrator of the book did an excellent job, and I think it made the academic language easier to ingest. So highly recommend. Another 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. This is a graphic novel, but it's not like cohesive. Each chapter in the graphic novel is a different spooky story. They're all there and meant to spook you out. And I did not like this, unfortunately. And I'm really sad about it because I had kind of been hyping this up in my head when I was really in the mood for like spooky tales. But besides the art style, there was really nothing going for the book. Most of the stories like left me hanging, and if it wasn't for the art style, I don't think any of the stories would have scared me at all. And I'm a really big scaredy cat, so. Then I read Women Talking by Miriam Taves. This book follows a group of women whom overnight in their Mennonite community were drugged and raped by the men also in their community. And this is based on a true story. The book follows the women over the course of a couple of nights and how they decide whether or not they want to leave the community and kind of betray their religion and betray what they know. I ended up giving this book a solid 3 stars. The story about the women was really, really important. I think there were really interesting discussions and I would have loved to hear more from the women. But that was the problem about this book. I think it's kind of paved as this like feminist necessary reading, yet it is told in the voice of a man on the compound. So the explanation for this is that the women can't read or write, and so they need a man to kind of take the notes for them so that they have the minutes of what they've said during their conversation so that their decision is like kind of laid out on paper, which I understood. But I have 2 critiques, and this might be like minor spoilers, so I'll put spoiler warning here in case you care. But basically, the first problem I had with this kind of narrative style is that it's a book. Like, we didn't need that explanation. Like, the women could have just spoke and we could have read it and it could have just been about women talking, which is the whole point of the book. So like that rubbed me kind of the wrong way, because in a book that's focusing on women who aren't usually able to speak for themselves, to have a man speak for them didn't make sense to me. Then the second reason is because there were aspects in the book that made us focus on this man's story. I don't know if I can emphasize this enough about how much I did not care about him. So I just didn't understand why a book that's focusing on women talking, it's in the title, why are we wasting pages and plot points on the story of a male character? I'm not saying this because I hate men, which I do. I'm saying this because he really truly was not a necessary character, and that's why it really annoyed me. Overall, I think this book was well written. There was just that really major aspect of the plot and the structure of the novel that I couldn't give the novel any more than 3 stars. Then I read The Skin We're In by Desmond Cole. This is another nonfiction book about the Black experience in Canada. It's kind of like it takes place over a year. So each chapter discusses like something that happened in January and then something that happened in February in our country, and basically how that all ties together to being a Black person in Canada. Desmond Cole is a reporter, and it really shows in his eloquent writing style. I think the idea of making each chapter an essay that focuses on a specific month in time was really creative. I also think that the writing was very accessible, very engaging. There were certain points in the book where I didn't feel like I was reading a non-fiction. I read this all in one day because it was so captivating and so quick to read. I loved it. 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read kind of another disappointing read, but it was My Year of Meats by Ruth Ozeki. The reason why I say this is disappointing is because Ruth Ozeki is an author that I am extremely interested in reading more from, and this was my first read from her. I don't know what I was expecting, but I had high hopes. This book follows a Japanese American woman named Jane, who over the course of the year is producing a television show. Is it called? Oh yeah, My American Wife, which is a Japanese television show sponsored by an American meat exporting business. The goal of the TV show is kind of to promote meat eating in Japan. Jane's life is kind of intertwined with a woman on the other side of the globe named Akiko. Akiko is a Japanese housewife who struggles to escape from her abusive husband. And then eventually, like, their 2 stories collide at the end. I really liked Ozeki's writing. So I know that her writing will be something I will enjoy more of in the future. Even though I wasn't enjoying the plot or the characters of the novel, I was still really engaged. The messages of the meat industry were as you expected. They were very real, very raw, very correct. And the struggles experienced by Jane and Akiko were sad and interesting. And despite liking that Ozeki was putting in these 2 types of themes within the novel, I just didn't feel like I cared about this story at all, and I feel really bad, and I gave it 2 stars. I'm sorry, Ruth. Then I read Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. This is the story of a Black woman named Amira and her boss, I guess, Alix Chamberlain. And one night Amira is taking out Alix's daughter to the grocery store and is accused of kidnapping this white baby. That summary I've seen everywhere, and it only happens in the first chapter of the book. I gave this book 4 stars because Kylie Reed quickly became an author that I would love to read more from in the future. This is her debut novel, and I was completely blown away by it. I loved the writing style of the novel. It was easy, light. It had these hidden undertones that were paired with really impactful scenes. So the book discusses performative activism and allyship, and I think Reed really hit it on the nail. Both white main characters in the book use Amira for their own kind of gain. They're constantly speaking over her and speaking for her and ignoring her feelings in order to do what they feel is right. I think Reed did a great job at creating very realistic characters. I felt like I could meet these characters on the street any day. Overall, I thought this was really good and I can't wait to read more from this author in the future. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read a manga called There Are Things I Can't Tell You by Edako Mofu. I didn't really expect anything from this book because I kind of requested it on NetGalley after seeing my friend Ness post about it on Twitter. It was a really cute, angsty manga that follows 2 men who have been friends for quite a while, I think since high school, and they end up falling in love. So as you can imagine, the angst was really good because there is no better angst than friends to lovers. And I love when friends pine over each other because I love to suffer with the characters. Something that I think is probably my biggest complaint and what really ruined the book for me was the mismatched flashbacks that occur throughout the novel. This could be like a personal issue, but I was extremely confused most of the time when reading these flashbacks. I find flashbacks in graphic novel and manga formats really pulls me out of the story. However, I won't deny that it was crucial to understanding the characters and their motivations. It just took me a while to really understand what was happening. Also, there are some explicit sex scenes that I wasn't expecting, but I'm not complaining about. Then I read a book called Crowned a Traitor by Kate Callahan. From what I remember, this book is about a girl named Clara who is the daughter of Satan, but she lives in a fairy world. And basically her main goal is to escape to this fae world from the world that she was currently occupying. And if that synopsis sounds confusing to you, it's because it was. I definitely think this book needed a few extra rounds of proofreading and editing before being published, or at least being put on NetGalley. The plot definitely needed 100 more pages to be fully developed and to be fully understandable. I needed way more explanation on why the things that were happening in the world were happening. Additionally, I think the relationships in the novel needed more explanation just so we could understand why we needed to care about the love interests, the friends. I also felt like the ending was a bit rushed. I feel like it came out of nowhere. Part of that comes from the lack of world building, and part of that comes from things that were being told to the readers and not really being shown. So I think that the author really had something there, and I think with 200 to 300 extra pages in the book, she would have really fleshed out the problems that I have for this novel. So as it is a series, I really hope that more explanations are developed the more books come out. Then I read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. So this book follows a man named Zachary who, upon finding this mysterious book in his university library, Zachary is kind of thrust into this big adventure about passing through doors and people who belong in books. It was a wild ass ride. First of all, how beautiful is this book? I love it. Now, Heather from Aphrodite Reads asked me if this book is worth $400, and I can say no, it is not. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, please search up the price of the UK special edition book with taxes and delivery fees to the US. That gives you a kind of understanding of her joke. And while I don't think this book is worth $400, I do think this book was really excellent. Firstly, I want to say that I gave this 4 stars, but it's one of those books that I know if I read it at a better time, I would have given it a 5 stars. I read this while at a chalet, dabbling with the devil's lettuce and drinking a couple of beers or 2 or 3 or 4. And in the daytime, while I was reading this book, my head might have been hurting a little bit, Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I wasn't as 100% devoted to this book as I wanted to be. Morgenstern's writing was, as to be expected, gorgeous and beautiful and eloquent and wonderful and flowery and
talented, brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping, spectacular, never the same, totally unique, completely not ever been done before.
The plot of this book was an ode to literature and story, which is something I absolutely adore in my novels. And even though I was putting this book down a lot because I was on vacation, I had really, really, really wished I wasn't. I was really captivated by the plot, and every time I put this book down, I wanted to pick it back up. So I want to reread this in the near future and fully immerse myself into the story and give it the 5 stars that I feel like it probably deserves. Then I read an arc of Somebody Give This Heart a Pen by Sophie Thacker. And this is a collection of poems discussing coming of age, racism, relationships, going from youth to high school to adulthood. So like with most collections of like stories and poetries, I tend to not enjoy everything in the collection, and that was the case with this book. I think Thacker is a incredibly talented author, and it was extremely obvious that she performs poetry because these poems felt like they could be performed. There were a lot of really important poems in the book that I really enjoyed. My personal favorite was called Excerpt from a Letter to My Little Black Girl. It was chef's kiss. So good. Overall, I highly recommend this collection of poems, especially if you're into poetry, and I gave this 3.5 stars out of 5. And then finally, the last book I read in the month of August, Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. I shit you not, I did not expect to enjoy this book, and I actually ended up enjoying this somewhat. So Carry On by Rainbow Rowell is basically a gay fan fiction of the series that shall not be named any further. And so while I did enjoy it for that like kind of nostalgic and fulfilling Kelsey Levati's little gay heart, I had a lot of problems with the book's writing and format. So Simon and Baz were actually really interesting characters, and if you know anything about me, you know that I loved my angsty bad boy little vampire baby. And I did think that their relationship in the novel was really great. I do think that it came a bit of from left field, but it was fine because they were cute. I also really enjoyed Penny in the novel. I think she's kind of like the Hermione replacement. I thought she was really brave and strong and smart. But I think that that is like literally where my appreciation ends. So I did find myself like speeding through this when I was reading it. But there were some aspects of the world that were just so silly to me. The names of spells was so ridiculous to me. Like there was no creativity with those spells. I found them so silly, so lame. So that really pulled me out of the story. I definitely see myself rereading this in the future and potentially picking up the sequel because it was fun and I really did love the main characters, just I really did not like the plot or the writing format. And that is it. Finally, that is my August wrap up. Please let me know, first of all, what did you read in the month of August? Let me know. Did you read any of these books before? Did you like them? Did you hate them? Do you agree with me that Middlesex is the worst book ever written on the face of the earth? Or do you think it's amazing? Fight with me in the comments because I love to debate. Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell. I don't know how to end these things, so I will see you next time. Bye!